Hello and welcome to the Temple Mount Podcast. My name is Shogun. Today is our third meeting in our Read the Bible Together project. I guess we should come up with a convenient name for it, but we're trying to read the Bible out loud from Genesis to Revelation. And now we are picking up at Genesis 9. You can find our previous uploads and podcasts on this and other subjects on the Temple Mount official podcast on YouTube and BitChute, and find us on the Temple Mount Discord server. I'd also like to start with a prayer, just traditionally before the Bible study. Heavenly Father God, we thank you for the opportunity to come together with friends around the world and study the word of your scripture. And we just ask that you'll send your Holy Spirit to help us to interpret, to discern, to understand, to grow in wisdom, and that you will continue to guide us through this process and allow us to reach its conclusion and the fulfillment of the goal that we've set of studying the entire Bible together as a community. And we just pray that that will have benefits and plant seeds in all of our life that will bear fruit. In the name of Christ Jesus, we pray. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So we are picking up, So we're picking up at Genesis 21. And today, or Genesis 19, and this is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. That evening, the two angels came to the entrance of the city of Sodom. Lot was sitting there, and when he saw them, he stood up to meet them. Then he welcomed them and bowed with his face to the ground. "My lords," he said, "come to my home to wash your feet and be my guests for the night. You may then get up early in the morning and be on your way again." "Oh no," they replied, "we'll just spend the night out here in the city square." But Lot insisted, so at last they went home with him. Lot prepared a feast for them, complete with fresh bread made without yeast, and they ate. But before they retired for the night, all the men of Sodom, young and old, came from all over the city and surrounded the house. They shouted to Lot, "Where are the men who came to spend the night with you? Bring them out to us so we can have sex with them." So Lot stepped outside to talk to them, shutting the door behind them. "Please, my brothers," he begged, "don't do such a wicked thing. Look, I have 2 virgin daughters. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do with them as you wish. But please leave these men alone, for they are my guests and under my protection." "Stand back," they shouted. "This fellow came to town as an outsider, and now he's acting like our judge. We'll treat you far worse than those other men." And they lunged toward Lot to break down the door. But the 2 angels reached out, pulled Lot into the house, and bolted the door. They then blinded all the men, young and old, who were at the door of the house, so they gave up trying to get inside. Meanwhile, the angels questioned Lot. "Do you have any other relatives here in the city?" they asked. "Get them out of this place, your sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone else, for we are about to destroy the city completely. The outcry against this place is so great it has reached the Lord, and he has sent us to destroy it." So Lot rushed out to tell his daughter's fiancés, "Quickly, get out of the city. The Lord is about to destroy it." But the young men thought he was only joking. At dawn the next morning, the angels became insistent. "Hurry," they said to Lot. "Take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here. Get out right now, or you will be swept away in the destruction of the city." When Lot still hesitated, the angels seized his hand and the hands of his wife and 2 daughters and rushed them to safety outside the city, for the Lord was merciful. When they were safely out of the city, one of the angels ordered, "Run for your lives and don't look back or stop anywhere in the city. Escape to the mountains or you will be swept away." "Oh no, my lord," Lot begged. "You have been so gracious to me and saved my life, and you have shown such great kindness, but I cannot go to the mountains. Disaster would catch up to me and I would soon die. See, there is a small village nearby. Please let me go there instead. Don't you see how small it is? Then my life will be saved." "All right," the angel said, "I will grant your request. I will not destroy the little village. But hurry, escape to it, for I can do nothing until you arrive there." This explains why that village was known as Zoar, which means little place. Lot reached the village just as the sun was rising over the horizon. Then the Lord rained down fire and burning sulfur from the sky on Sodom and Gomorrah. He utterly destroyed them along with the other cities and villages of the plain, wiping out all the people and every bit of vegetation. But Lot's wife looked back as she was following behind him, and she turned into a pillar of salt. Abraham got up early that morning and hurried out to the place where he had stood in the Lord's presence. He looked out across the plain toward Sodom and Gomorrah and watched as the columns of smoke rose from the cities like smoke from a furnace. But God had listened to Abraham's request and kept Lot safe, removing him from the disaster that engulfed the cities of the plain. Afterwards, Lot left Zoar because he was afraid of the people there, and he went to live in a cave in the mountain with his 2 daughters. One day, the older daughter said to her sister, "There are no men left anywhere in this entire area, so we can't get married like everyone else. And our father will soon be too old to have children. Come, let's get him drunk with wine, and then we will have sex with him. That way we will preserve our family line through our father." So that night they got him drunk with wine, and the older daughter went in and had intercourse with her father. He was unaware of her lying down or getting up again. The next morning, the older daughter said to her younger sister, "I had sex with our father last night. Let's get him drunk with wine again tonight, and you will go in and have sex with him. That way we will preserve our family line through our father." So that night they got him drunk with wine again, and the younger daughter went in and had intercourse with him. As before, he was unaware of her lying down or getting up again. As a result, both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their own father. When the older daughter gave birth to a son, she named him Moab. He became the ancestor of the nation now known as the Moabites. When the younger daughter gave birth to a son, she named him Ben-Ammi. He became the ancestor of the nation now known as the Ammonites. Abraham moved south to the Negev and lived for a while between Kadesh and Shur, and then he moved on to Gerar. While living there as a foreigner, Abram introduced his wife Sarah by saying, "She is my sister." So King Abimelech of Gerar sent for Sarah and had her brought to him at his palace. But that night God gave to Abimelech in a dream and told him, "You are a dead man, for that woman you have taken is already married." But Abimelech had not slept with her yet. So he said, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Didn't Abraham tell me she is my sister?" And she herself said, "Yes, he is my brother. I acted in complete innocence. My hands are clean." In the dream, God responded, "Yes, I know you are innocent. That's why I kept you from sinning against me and why I did not let you touch her. Now return the woman to her husband, and he will pray for you, for he is a prophet. Then you will live. But if you don't return her to him, you can be sure that you and all your people will die." Abimelech got up early the next morning and quickly called all his servants together. When he told them what had happened, his men were terrified. Then Abimelech called for Abraham. "What have you done to us?" he demanded. "What crime have I committed that deserves treatment like this, making me and my kingdom guilty of this great sin? No one should ever do what you have done. Whatever possessed you to do such a thing?" Abraham replied, "I thought, this is a godless place. They will want my wife and will kill me to get her. And she really is my sister, for we both have the same father, but different mothers, and I married her. When God called me to leave my father's home and to travel from place to place, I told her, 'Do me a favor. Wherever we go, tell the people that I am your brother.' Then Abimelech took some of his sheep and goats, cattle, and male and female servants, and presented them to Abraham. He also returned his wife Sarah to him. Then Abimelech said, 'Look over my land and choose any place where you would like to live.' And he said to Sarah, 'Look, I am giving your brother 1,000 pieces of silver in the presence of all these witnesses. This is to compensate you for any wrongs I may have done to you. This will settle any claim against me, and your reputation is cleared.' Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female servants so they could have children. For the Lord had caused all the women to be infertile because of what had happened with Abraham's wife, Sarah." So I kind of want to go on, but at the same time, like these 3 chapters are so wacky in their own different ways, and there's so much to discuss in just these 3 chapters that I kind of feel like we should maybe stop here to discuss for a while.
Yeah, I think so too.
So just while it's fresh in my mind, I'd just like to note a few things that are interesting. So one, again, there's this really weird like ancient aliens or limited God implication of this verse, just like a lot of the verses we read earlier in Genesis. Again, we've mentioned it says, something along the lines of, the outcry against this place is so great that it has reached the Lord and he has sent us to destroy it. So what the implication of this is had the implication not being so great, or the outcry not been so great, it would not have reached the Lord, which would mean that God is not, omniscient. He doesn't know everything that's happening, but if things get bad enough, then it like goes up the chain of command and gets to God, which is just different than how we think of it usually, with God automatically knowing everything. And another thing on that note that's weird is like, who is the narrator? Like, who is the person who sees and knows this stuff to write it down, right? Because obviously we have to talk about, this is one of the most disturbing parts of the Bible, in the sense that when he says, "Don't do such a wicked thing. Look, I have 2 virgin daughters. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do with them as you wish. But please leave these men alone, for they are my guests and are under my protection." obviously this is very like disturbing from our modern morality, because like how is his daughters not under his protection, and like why did he not care about his daughters at all that he would do that, which fortunately doesn't end up happening in this story. And I just like to note also there's another verse and story in the Bible in a different place where a very similar thing happens, where there's like guests in a house, and then all the people outside want to rape the guests, and then the guy gives like someone else instead, and the other story gives like a concubine. And so we can talk about that story and whether or not it connects to this one, because it's really weird how those two stories are so similar, but maybe people were just that, out of control back then. That was normal.
It was so weird too, because like, so the part I kind of chuckled, the part where they blinded everyone, dude. It's like a flashbang.
Right, a flashbang to stop them from getting gang raped by the town. Yeah, it's crazy. There's so many strange things here. So another, it's like, it seems like Lot says like the angels, quote unquote, are like, you need to get out of the city. And like they ask, so it says the angels question Lot, do you have any other relatives here in the city? Get them out of this place, for we are about to destroy this city. So wouldn't you think angels would know whether he had other relatives in the city, right? Like, it really sounds like humans, right? Like a lot of this stuff, it sounds like humans, or if they're not like normal humans, they're not like what we think of as angels and gods. They're like more powerful, but they don't know everything, and they're not all powerful, and they kind of act like people. And then they tell Lot, get out of the city. And then he says like, wait, like, can't I just go to this little town? Because I cannot go to the mountains. So just spare this little village. And they're like, okay, I'll grant your request. I will not destroy the little village, right? And so it's similar to when Lot was like arguing with God, or Abram was arguing with God, saying, won't you spare the town for 50 people? What about for 40 people? So it's like these beings don't even have their plan like clear. Like they're not set on what they're going to do. They're just like, you got to get out of here. And he's like, can I go there? They're like, okay, fine, you can go there, right? Like, so it's like, it's not like they have it all divinely planned out, like, and they're susceptible to being pled with or like negotiated with by people, which is interesting.
Yeah, it also reminds me of how the initial, like, just like one or two chapters before this, it was like, yeah, we've heard a lot of bad stuff about this place. Let's go down and check it out. Like, what?
What if these wily townspeople are actually seeing like really attractive, big bosomed ladies, but it's actually like male angels, but they're like projecting this feminine quality that like tricks them into thinking that they're like, heterosexually beautiful,
I don't know.
There's another weird thing here too, which is like, it's not made clear at all whether Lot knows that these people are angels, right? It doesn't say. It says 2 angels came to the entrance to the city of Sodom. Lot was sitting there, and when he saw them, he welcomed them and he gave them hospitality, but it doesn't explain whether he knew that they were angels or not, right? Or if he did know how. And it seems pretty clear that people in the village didn't know they were angels. They just thought they were regular people, which then raised the questions like, were they angels? How do we know they're angels? Why are they being identified as angels in the first place by the translation? And when you realize that the word angel translates into messenger, like the word angel actually translates into messenger, and Lord literally means a king or a lord, it's just like, is this really supposed to be about God and angels? Because it makes a lot more sense if you're just saying, oh, the outcry about this town has reached so high that it's come to the king, and the king has sent his messengers or his agents to check out if it's really as bad as they say it is. And if it is, he'll destroy it. And by the way, I'll spare it if there's this many good people or whatever. All of this makes perfect sense if you just take it literally and translate it as Lord, meaning like my Lord, right? A king. And then you translate angels as messengers, then the story makes perfect sense. But as a story about, and that would even make sense then why he was going to offer his daughters, right? Because as fucked up as it is back then, if you were like entertaining the messengers of like a king, right, that would have been so important. Like you'd get killed if anything bad happened to these messengers or whatever, right? And they're under your hospitality and under your protection. That's like literally a human social custom, right? Like, so I'm starting to really question whether some of these books in the Old Testament were actually literally written about like a Hebrew king at some point, and then later got translated into just Lord and interpreted as God. But
yeah, the chapter before this, Abraham and God were talking about Sodom and Gomorrah. And then the angels went down there, and then Lot got introduced into the story, I think. So I just want to say, I think that was the whole point of the test, though, was like, let's see what the angels do, right, when they go down there. And this reminds me of a story, a very specific story from a Greek mythology. I have to find it, but the idea was that, like, if I remember correctly, Zeus and Hermes go to like this like city or some shit, and they pretend to be poor beggars, and they get invited as a guest into one of the houses by one of the nicest people in the town, but nobody else invited them or gave a crap about them. So what happened was then Zeus just like fucking melted the whole thing. Just like, I don't know if he melted it, but something happened. All those people died except that one house that offered them help. So in a sense, like, if they came out as angels, then I guess everybody would be groveling. Whereas if they were in disguise, then it would make sense why this would be a good test. However, that's not all, because then there's the problem of, well, if this is a test for who is moral, then is throwing your virgin daughters out moral? Are the angels cool with that? Like, what? I don't know.
Well, yeah, it's very clear that like something strange is going on here, and again, it makes a lot of sense to me if I just understand that Lord, literally one of the meanings of the word Lord is just human king, human elite, and angel means messenger. So this story makes perfect sense from the perspective that there's a king who rules over a land. There's a particular town in that land that has a reputation of horrible things are happening there. It finally gets so egregious that this rises all the way up the chain of command to the king. The king sends his messengers to the town. They are taken under the hospitality of a guy named Lot. Back then, hospitality was a big deal, and then you wash their feet, you give them food, and they're under your protection. So that's why he was willing to give his daughters or whatever, under this interpretation, which is just a theory, because back then it's fucked up, but that's how important kings were, and he probably would have been killed if anything bad had happened to the messengers of the king while they were under his protection or whatever. That's like one way I would interpret it. Go ahead. Sorry.
I just want to add something about this, but you were on a roll, so I'll go after you.
Well, I was going to go on to another part of the story before, so if you had something else to say about this one, maybe do.
Oh, okay, then great, fantastic. Yeah, like one of the things that bothers me is like the previous chapter, Abraham was negotiating with God. Like, what if there are like 40, 50, 30, 20, whatever, and all the way down to like 10 people? And then what bothers me is that the fact that God destroys not just Sodom and Gomorrah, but like the entire plain, including like a bunch of other villages and cities in that plain, the implication is that there is no innocent children, no pregnant woman, none of that, none of that, and that's weird because it feels like it's trying to make me be okay with genocide. You know what I mean? Like the whole preamble or the setup was like, yeah, there's only 10 people. Turns out that there are less than 10 people apparently, but that doesn't make sense if you consider like a certain percentage of the population as children. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, all the adults are like daemons from the pits of hell. Doesn't matter. As long as they're babies and children, whatever. In that scenario, you really couldn't say they deserve to be burnt to a crisp. So I feel like this story really numbs people to great acts of genocide and death by kind of making us think that sometimes there isn't even a single innocent person, whereas we know that's not the case.
I mean, as we'll find as we go through the Old Testament, stories about genocide and women and children being killed, and in some cases, by our modern standards, raped or enslaved. I mean, it's going to be common throughout our whole journey through the Old Testament. But it's very clear that the morality system of the people being described, or people or entities being described in this book, does not match ours, right? That's just and it's really bizarre. I noticed, and we only read 3 verses from like 19 to 22. It was like, and in that 3 verses, there's so much like messed up stuff to unpack. So first you have the gang rape situation that's playing out. Pardon my language, I guess you're not supposed to say that word or whatever, but that's what the story's about. They're trying to sexually assault these men. Then he tries to give over his daughter, so that's screwed up. Then it immediately goes to this story about incest and the guy Lot and his daughter's getting him drunk and having sex with him. And this is a very strange scenario that's playing out here too. And again, I have to ask, who is seeing this and who is writing it down? And how does it come to be in the Bible, right? Because the story is saying the daughters decide to get the father drunk, so drunk that it says, which obviously isn't true, right? But it says he doesn't remember lying down with them or waking up with them. So the implication is supposed to be he's totally innocent. It was just his mischievous daughters who forced him to get drunk. Right, as though he has no responsibility for how much alcohol he drinks, like they're pouring alcohol down his throat somehow. And two, that he somehow doesn't remember having sex with both of his daughters, which obviously he would remember or know that something
I can answer that, Shogun. The fact that there's some outsider looking in and seeing all of this occur with voices and sentences. I think it would be very easy to accomplish writing a Bible, for example, if you had an open third eye and you had full access to like seeing the past, present, and future, because you can get audible like kind of like hallucinatory like visions where you hear people speaking and interactions with actions and stuff.
So the question I'm just trying to raise is like, who is the narrator and observer intended to be, and how would this event have been recorded and by who, and how did it come to be here? Because in the story, even the father is not supposed to have even known that this happened, and yet somehow someone knew it happened and wrote it down and thought it was important enough to record. And like, why would you even record this story? And like, how could you record it? Like, why was it important for us to know that this guy got drunk and had sex with his daughters? So important that we still preserve that, to this day in this like sacred book. It's just a very odd story. And also
John the Baptist.
I just want to finish saying one point about that. So the implication here is like all that happened is Sodom and Gomorrah got destroyed by this fire or whatever, right? Or that whatever God did. But that was just one city. There is cities all around, right? Whoever people come and go all the time. So there's no logical reason here why these girls resorted to having sex with their daughter to pass on their line. They could have literally just gone nearby and found like another town. Like we even know from the earlier story that Lot went to a little town. Remember, there was a small town that was spared. He said, I can't go to the mountains. I have to go to this little town. And it specifically says, okay, we'll spare the little town. And yet in the next chapter, it says there's no other men around. So we have to have sex with our dad, which literally doesn't make sense because it says that town is spared. Plus there's all the nearby towns. And then there's one other thing I wanted to remember because you brought it up earlier. Oh yeah. About how God, apparently there was nobody, like there wasn't even 10 good people because God didn't spare the town. But the other weird thing is when the angels get there, they say to Lot, do you have any other friends or family here? They have to get out too. So for some reason, all of Lot's family and friends are considered to be saved, regardless of whether they're good or not. It's like the angels don't even really have a super clear agenda here because like they're not trying to, I don't know. There's just so many strange things in this like few verses.
What if the same guy that wrote Revelations actually wrote the entire Bible, and then the church like basically got a hold of that information and then just like pieced it together as different separate books? Like John the Baptist, I'm thinking, is the guy that wrote the entire Bible, maybe because he's a visionary. He was like, seeing visions and stuff.
There's historical reasons why we know that can't be true, but
I want to add something. So you were like, how did they know? It's possible that they figured out later on. So it says that Lot, with his daughters, had 2 children with each of his, one with each of his daughters, and they became like, what was that? Like ancestors of a nation, and the nation had a name. So it seems like eventually, the cat was out of the bag, and I'm pretty sure at some point the daughters confessed.
Maybe it's possible. I mean, it's not just this verse, right? There's many parts in the Bible where something will be described where there's only one person there, there's only two people there, and like, you know what I mean? And yet, who is this narrator who is like observing everything that happens and narrating it? Because sometimes that just doesn't make sense. Like there was nobody there who would have written it down or could have written it down or would have or could have had this particular detail. So it's just like either it's someone somehow getting this information supernaturally, or it's just like, I don't know, it's strange. But it's just a more general question to consider as you're reading the Bible. You just take it for granted that the Bible is the narrator, but you got to think like who is actually originally there to see this and write it down, you know. But
Yeah. What's the place? Was it Zor? The place?
Zoar, yeah, and that's why I'm saying that it doesn't make sense, because what the angels originally say to Lot is, you need to get out of here and run out into the mountains. And then he goes, oh no, I can't live in the mountains, right? I'll die. Let me go to this little town. It's just a little town. Surely you can spare that. And they go, well, your request is granted. We'll spare this little town. It's called Zoar. So you know right there that wherever Lot went, he wasn't by himself with just his daughters, because that's the implication, that there's nobody else in this whole region to have sex with. So we have to have sex with our dad. But you know from the earlier verse that isn't true, because he went to a little town that would have had at least two men in it. So.
Yeah. So basically, my understanding is, I'm reading this a little bit. I'm reading it again. It turns out that he left Zor because he was afraid of the people there. Which means the people are still there.
Yeah, well, we know there were still people in Zoar. Yeah, exactly, because the Bible says it. So, which means that however far he went from Zoar to where he is, he could just go back to find husbands for his daughters, right? Or his daughters could just go there and meet some men. So this story, the excuse that the girls are giving, according to this story, is nonsensical, right? And I suppose, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's also funny how he changed his mind, because he was like, "Yeah, please, not the mountains, please."
Like, fuck this! I'm going to the mountains.
Like, what?
Yeah. The whole thing is very hard to reconcile with the idea of like an omnipotent, omnibenevolent, omniscient God. And again, it's like one thing I notice is like, where does that concept of omnipotent, omnibenevolent, omniscient God come from? Because that's what everybody thinks of when we think of God. But if we take the Bible as the source of God, and we take the word Lord to mean God, then like that's not how God is described in the Bible, right? Like all through the Bible, he is described in a different way than that. And somehow or another, we're going to have to reconcile that. But I do want to also break down this third verse. It's just as weird. So there's a weird jumping around that happens here, where we go from the earlier part that we're reading last session is about Abraham and Sarai. And then all of a sudden, Abraham and Lot are in contact with each other. There's this battle of the kings. And then we go back to Lot. So it goes from talking about Abraham in chapter 18, and then it goes back to talking about Lot in chapter 19. And then it goes back to talking about Abraham in chapter 20. So it's jumping back and forth between these characters of Abram and Lot to fill in these little details of the story. So now we go back to Abraham and Lot. Now this is really weird, because there's a repeat. If you remember from the last Bible reading, there's a whole sequence where Abraham is traveling around with his 100-year-old wife. At this point, she's over 90 years old. She's almost 100 years old. And yet everywhere that Abraham goes, everybody wants to steal his wife and fuck her. Pardon my language, have sex with her. So this is itself very white. What's going on here? Why can this guy not go around with his 100-year-old wife without everybody trying to steal her and bang her? Right? She must have been really attractive. Or people back then were just so crazy that like they were just desperate to bang people that were 100 years old, which is kind of hard to imagine. So, or back then aging was different, and people who are 100 years old could still look like they were in the prime of their life, which seems to be implied by all the long lifespans in the early genealogies. But
although when we go back to the verses on how his wife is like barren and old, isn't she like so freaking old? How can this happen? They both even laughed at the idea of her getting pregnant. Yeah,
right. So she was actually an old woman, and yet now twice in the story, like everywhere he goes, he's running into this problem where everybody's trying to take his wife and have sex with her. So again, it's very hard to understand, because in a modern world that doesn't happen, right? Old women are not considered, highly desirable sexual partners that you have to worry about. Oh, I can't take my grandma out in public or someone's going to try and take her, right? So either people were very weird and different about their sexuality back then, which certainly seems to be implied by pretty much every chapter that we just read in one way or another, or something weird is going on here. And again, it's weird because this is like a Groundhog's Day, like repeat of the last story. So what happened in the last story? Someone comes up to Abraham, says, "Who's this woman with you?" He says, "This is my sister." They say, "Oh, she's single. Okay, I'm gonna take her." Then God punishes them brutally. Like, even though they didn't do anything wrong and they don't know anything about it, God punishes them. Doesn't punish Abraham or Sarah, punishes them, and then literally goes and says, like, "You're a dead man." Like, and this is another really weird interaction here, right? So this guy, whoever he is, takes Sarah, thinking that she's a single woman. And then God comes and says, "You're a dead man because you took a married woman." He's like, "What? I don't even know what you're talking about." And then God's like, "I know you didn't know what I was talking about. That's why I told you. Like, so just give her back and you won't be a dead man." It's like, well, then why would you start with "you're a dead man"? Like, you know what I mean? Like, that doesn't make sense. It's like, "No, Hermes, you're a dead man. You didn't pay back the $100 that you owe me." It's like, "I don't know you money." He goes, "I know you didn't owe me any money." It's like, well, then why did you say I'm a dead man? Like, it doesn't make, like, you get what I'm saying? It's a very like weird human thing that doesn't make sense. Like, why would you approach it that way? And then again, it's really weird. In both cases, it ends with the guy who took Abraham's wife giving Abraham these huge bribes, like all this money, all this property, all these servants. So Abraham's just making bank by basically doing this weird hustle where he lets people take his wife, and then God comes and says, "Hey, you took Abraham's wife. I'm going to kill you." And they're like, "Oh my God, I'll do anything you want. Just leave me alone." And so Abraham's getting crazy rich through this process of like his 100-year-old wife getting taken. And then he reminds us, "Oh, and by the way, she actually is my sister." So in this whole verse, like, one verse is about the guy trying to give his daughters to the, rape mob. The second verse is about the two daughters getting their father drunk and doing incest with him. And then the third verse reminds you, and by the way, Abraham and Sarai were brother and sister. And then here's this whole thing about, so it's just like so much going on here that's just so strange. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. And the whole kingdom will become infertile or whatever. Like, what?
well, and
What
that's
the
the funniest part there. I'm glad you reminded me of that, because this is like what you were talking about earlier. This is actually one of the funnier things to me. So the implication here is, in the short period of time, which may have only been like 24 hours to a week, it's not clear, in which this man has taken Abraham's wife, Sarah, and is living with her, but hasn't had sex with her yet. We're being told that God made the whole kingdom infertile, but then undid it after a period of only a few days or weeks, which would not be long enough to deduce that anyone was infertile. And what would it mean to say, well, you were infertile for, the whole country was infertile for a week, but then I undid it, so now you're not infertile anymore? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, how do we know that anyone was ever infertile? And why would God curse everybody with infertility and then undo it like it was a mistake, like a few days later? Why would you even do it at all if you're just going to undo it a few days later? You know what I mean? It's like being like, it's like, I give you all cancer. Okay, I cured it. Now you don't have it anymore. It's like, well, we never did, right? Like,
Also, like, something else that I've noticed is there's like this idea that the others are like subhuman, basically. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Both when it came to Lot and Abraham, they're very afraid of the people around them. They assume the worst of them, you know? Like, Abraham was like, "I thought you guys were godless people that were going to kill me and rape my wife." That's
well,
how he
that
starts,
seems
you
to
know?
be
Like,
the case, with Lot, and that was obviously what was going on
well,
at that time. So,
well, it was, except as he moved to Zor, and then he was
Zor was a town in the same place, though. Like, it was like actually part of the same city. Like, that's the other weird part, is it basically implied that God spares like a district of the city, because basically Lot doesn't want to walk that far to get like all the way out of the city. So he's like, "Can you just let me walk like over there?" He's like, "All right, we'll leave that place."
but like he was so terrified of the people of Zor, which, I mean, he was living there for a while. So like, what happened?
Yeah, and how much worse could it be than the city he was living in with the rape mob right outside his house, literally trying to get into his house and rape him or his guests, like, and he was living there for God knows how long. How much worse could Zor have been than that? Like, you know.
And the thing is, he was asking for that. And he was like, I got it. Nope. Mountain it is. Oh, God. It's so good.
I mean, it's strange. I'm wondering, is there anything else? And so again, it's like, yeah, why is so these people are very afraid of the Lord, right? And again, all of this makes perfect sense if you consider that the Lord is literally a human king. Then all of this makes sense, right? So this guy is like, whoa, I didn't realize that that this was your wife. Here, take money, take land, just leave me alone. I don't want any trouble, right? This is what you do if you accidentally like almost sleep with like a mob boss's like daughter, right? So like Abraham has some personal friendship and relationship with this character called the Lord, right? They talk, they hang out face to face. The Lord made him do the circumcision thing. Like they talk, like they have conversations. So whoever the Lord is, it's someone that literally talks to Abraham and literally like walks around. Like it says, like the Lord was approaching as they were walking to the place. We'll get to that verse later when circumcision, whatever is mentioned again. So like I'm trying to figure it out. It's almost like Abraham is doing this on purpose, right? If I'm being like, looking at it with a critical eye. So if Abraham knows that he's personal friends with the Lord, who's some influential, powerful king who has the power to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah and do all these other things, and then he therefore is kind of letting, this is just speculation, but he's letting these men take his wife because he knows that then he can use the fact that he has this connection with the Lord to get them to pay him like, bribes basically. So it's like it almost seems to be sort of like a hustle that he's running at this point. Either that or he's just doing the same thing, but each time it ends up with him getting a bunch of money and all this stuff. So it's really weird. But the point is, these people are afraid of the Lord, and they think that by bribing Abraham with gold and land and property, that will save them from the Lord, which actually ends up being true. And again, it says, then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his few servants so they could have children, which is the first time that it mentions that they couldn't have children. It doesn't even mention that before, I don't think. It only throws in the last verse, for the Lord had caused all the women to be infertile because of what had happened with Abraham's wife, Sarah, which again, doesn't even mention that in the earlier narrative. It just added in the last verse that had happened. And again, nothing happened with Abraham's wife, Sarah. According to the story, they never had sex or anything. So why would God curse the whole country to be infertile just because temporarily Abraham's wife went with a guy somewhere, but they didn't even have sex? So it's like, obviously Abraham has this special status and relationship with this being called God, who's very concerned in like these minor personal details about, Abraham and his wife. Like it's very strange.
It's also weird, the part where he says, like, yeah, I know you're innocent. That's because I kept you from sinning. And like, isn't that
Well, the
whole like you're free to sin, use your free will to sin, completely breaking that, because it's like, yeah, you're innocent because I stopped you. Let me see if I can find it.
I have it right here. So it's in the dream. Okay, so this whole verse needs a quick breakdown because it's really quite interesting. So Abraham introduced his wife Sarah by saying, she is my sister. Oh, so King Abimelech of Gerar sent for Sarah and had her brought to him at his palace. So this is even more intriguing. So it's actually the king, right? So Abraham moves to a new place with 100-year-old woman, and immediately the king of that place sends for that woman. What is going on here, right? Like, this is the king. This is like, he is the powerful guy. He wants this 100-year-old woman. Why? It's not because of her physical beauty. It's not because of her fertility, unless she is somehow an insanely beautiful 100-year-old woman. But it's almost like, do they want her because of her bloodline or something? Like, what is going on here? Why do they want this 100-year-old woman so bad that the king immediately comes and takes his wife? But then anyways, it says God appears to him in a dream. So this rules out my theory that this is just like a human being, because he's appearing to people in dreams. So if he has to have like at least magical powers or psychic powers or something. But yeah, so he says, you are a dead man, for the woman you have taken is already married, which implies that anyone who has sex with a married woman will die. Abimelech had not slept with her yet, so he said, Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? I acted in complete innocence. God responded, yes, I know you are innocent. But the verse before is, you are a dead man, for the woman you have taken is already married. Next God thing says, yes, I know you are innocent. So this means that if both of these verses are true, God has punished this man to die, even though he knows that he is innocent. which, if that is true, means God is not following our standards of justice because he's punishing a man to death that was innocent. And then he said, that's why I kept you from sinning against me and did not let you touch her. So again, there's so many levels of contradiction here, because he's saying, first he accuses of a crime, then he says he knows that he's innocent, but then he says, I kept you from sinning against me and did not let you touch her, which means he would have touched her if God hadn't stopped him from doing it. So he's innocent only because God prevented him from sinning. Now return the woman to her husband and he will pray for you, then you will live, which means he isn't a dead man, right? Because he starts by saying you're a dead man, but then he's saying, but you won't die, you will live, which is a contradiction. It's a threat. He's saying you have to give her back or you will die, but he started by saying you're a dead man. So this is just like a very weird way for God to communicate. Yeah, they will want my wife and will kill me to get her. It's a 100-year-old woman, so it's like, yeah, and then God restores their fertility. So that's only the 3 verses. A lot of mysteries, more questions than answers, really.
Sorry about that. I had an important call.
No, that's okay. So I think that's probably, unless does anyone else have any questions or comments or want to add anything to the discussion?
I just know how they're doing it, how they're writing this Bible. They're using their third eye. Do you know you can like rewind and fast forward certain scenes within your mind's eye when you open it and activate it and awaken it unto enough of a degree?
Okay. Well, third eye opening and awakening and all that, that's a conversation for the regular chat. But in here, we're just, we'll close the Bible study unless anyone else had anything else.
Yeah, I do. I find something strange about the story as well. So you know how the wife turns into like a goddamn pillar of salt? Sorry. I do apologize. She turns into a pillar of salt, and people just go on with their lives like they didn't just lose their mother and like wife and everything. It's
Yeah, well, definitely we get the sense from the Bible that there's a lot of things that are happening all the time that we would find totally crazy, and maybe to some extent those things were a lot more normal and people were a lot more numb to it, or maybe they just didn't bother writing down about things like grieving and their feelings because that was just taken for granted and it wasn't, they didn't record like their feelings or something. I don't know, but yeah.
I would think they would, right? Like if your mother just like got turned into salt because she looked back,
well,
you would.
It might be a reference to current salt back then. So maybe sort of offered.
You're cutting in and out, Dacian. I can't quite hear you.
Oh, never mind.
But now we can hear you. Just repeat yourself. Cut in and out. No? Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, the story obviously is not extensive, right? So obviously 99.999% of whatever's happening in all these stories we're not being told, right? It's not giving us every detail. It's not saying, and then she woke up and cried, and then she wiped her tears away, and then she had a bath, and then she ate dinner, and then she went and talked to her friends. Right? So we can assume that all of that may or may not have been happening and just not recorded in the story, because we know that it's not telling us even close to everything. It throughout the Bible, it records historical events. It doesn't necessarily give us any details about the aftermath or the trauma that people went through, or the grief that people went through, or the mourning or the ceremonies they may have done. And I think logically we can assume they probably did grieve. They probably did have some kind of mourning ceremonies or whatever, and that just wasn't recorded. But it's also pretty obvious that people back then were, by our modern standards, like totally crazy. Like they do things throughout the Bible that are pretty shocking to us, and obviously the culture was different back then, so maybe they really didn't have as much sentimentality as we do. I don't know, but
Shogun, at least in these passages that you've read, like it sounds like the Lord in this respect is like a bipolar black magician at this point.
Well, there's a lot of. Go ahead.
Well, I was thinking, because it seems like the common aside from God's wrath and judgment on certain situations, right? It also seems like it's a way in which to record genealogy and how it came about, because that seems to be a common thread for me, anyways, as I listen, right?
Well, yeah, they record the genealogies, and the establishing of lineages and genealogies and clans and tribes and stuff is a hugely important thing. And to go back to what Hugh said, there's obviously a lot of conversations we have had and can have about, who and what really is this Lord that's being described in the Bible, and what kind of being is this, and what would make sense with the story. Like, how do we make sense of all this? And that's going to be an ongoing question that hopefully we'll be able to slowly get more insights into as we continue this process of studying the Bible. So thank you guys. That was our third session. I think this is a good time to wrap it up. We'll continue to do it pretty much daily. And just as the tradition, I'll close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, Lord, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So thank you, everybody. This will be available on Discord, Temple Mount, YouTube, and BitChute channels. And we'll see you soon. God bless.